Welcome to Moving Work Forward. Thank you all so much for joining us at the Creative Exchange and supporting the Arts Foundation and all the wonderful work that they do here in Cape Cod. And of course, thank you for all of you for being part of our creative community. And I'm very excited. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sarah Colvin. I work for the Cape Cod Community Media Center, and I produce a local television news show called Cape Media News. And you know, I sometimes struggle with thinking of myself as an artist, but as a videographer, as a photographer, as a storyteller, I think I can definitely fall into that category. So it's something that I've been learning throughout the day and throughout my experiences here with the Arts Foundation that, yes, you know, you might do the news, it's a little serious, but it's art as well. So it's fun to be part of this community. The three folks that we have today joining us are amazing artists with some really incredible bodies of work. Roland Sherman is a photographer, and I'm very excited for him to talk a little bit about his career. He's photographed some of the most famous people in our country and has had quite an incredible life. And I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about photography in the days before we could all shoot with our telephones, right? When you really had to know how to do it and then spend some time in the darkroom, as he did for Life magazine way back in the day. Rebecca Sullivan is an author. She writes young adult novels, one of which was set right here on Cape Cod. Fantastic book, so I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit from Rebecca about how she became an author and got her work out there. And Christine Walker is a filmmaker, a film producer, works with the Provincetown Film Festival and the Provincetown Film Society. So again, very pleased to have three artists who represent three different sectors of the creative economy to talk a little bit about their careers and work. So I want to start really with having everyone, instead of reading the canned bios, talk a little bit about their careers. So Roland, we'll start with you, and I know we have some illustrations to go along with that. So I will pass the mic to you.
First slide.
It's very loud.
First slide, please. This is a picture of my kid brother Tom, taken in 1957. The first roll of film I ever put in a camera, this one came out, and I thought I might be a writer someday, but I realized that I couldn't describe anyone or write about anyone as perfectly as I imaged my kid brother. And that picture sort of changed my point of view. I was working at the Life darkroom as a, entry-level mixing chemical kind of level, but then I kept shooting, went back to school, Oberlin College, and switched my major to art. And next, well, stepping ahead 20 years to London, after a career at Life magazine, shooting a lot of stuff for them, I ended up in London when Nixon was president, because I didn't want to be in America. And I'd photographed the Beatles a bunch of times, but this is the one time I really thought I'd nailed a portrait of a working man's hero, which I think John Lennon was. Next. Of all the rockers I've ever photographed, and there have been many, Janis Joplin was the one that sent chills up my spine. This was at Woodstock. Next. That's my iconic picture of Dylan, which a year after that became the cover of his greatest hits album and won a Grammy Award. Next. That's a couple of years before that. That's where I went up to the Newport Folk Festival because Mary of Peter, Paul and Mary was there, and I was crazy about her. But instead of meeting her, I met Bob Dylan, the 19-year-old Bob Dylan. That was my first picture of him. That's it.
There's one more.
Oh yeah. I was lucky enough to be on Bobby Kennedy's presidential bid campaign for a while. I was in Washington when he was killed in LA. But I had this amazing body of work about him, but Life magazine had nowhere to run it because the man was dead. And I didn't even remember, believe it or not, I didn't remember I had all these pictures, and Life sent back like 40, 50 rolls of this wonderful picture of Bobby that I had. So some of them are now at the JFK Museum in Hyannis. Okay, that's it. I sent in about, I don't know, 15 or 20 pictures, and I realized I was the only one showing pictures, so I tried to make it as short as possible. I thought you guys would have pictures. You could read your book.
So Roland, I do have a question for you, and I think that, you know, as photographers, you know, you want to capture something about a person, and you showed us some pictures of some people that everyone is familiar with: Bobby Kennedy, John Lennon, Janis Joplin, Bob Dylan. So what is the challenge in capturing an image of someone who's so iconic? I mean, to see what you see, but do you feel the pressure of trying to capture what you think everyone else wants to see?
Is this what this is about?
It's part of it.
Well, as you can see from the stuff, the first picture is a portrait, which I still love to this day. And I put a portfolio together, started working for magazines, but the magazines were Time, Life, and Newsweek, and I still kept doing more and more portraits. My work was essentially portrait in essence. Naturally, I've done, you know, other stuff since, but as a portraitist, yeah, that's, I don't know what the question was. Help me out.
Do you feel conflict in trying to capture what everyone else thinks these famous people should look like, or do you think that your image will help, you know, communicate?
No, I don't think about that. I really just want to show light coming out of them. I do, and a lot of my work has that quality, which is thank God it does. I think that's my main quality as a photographer, not focusing or anything else, but I could somehow see the light emanating out of people, not even superstars, but portraits of kids, portraits of everybody. It's a gift. I'm really happy about it.
Wonderful, and I want to talk a little bit more about that a little later on, but Rebecca, I want to move on to you and talk a little bit about your career. I know that you've been telling stories forever, you know, since you were a young child. So talk about when you realized you were a writer and how you got to the process of, you know, just writing stories for yourself and then being a novelist. And you can feel free to grab that mic.
Check 1, 2.
There you go, fantastic.
I used to be a radio DJ on 96.3 The Rose when it was...
Me too.
Were you really?
I was, that's where I got my start.
96.3 The Rose, no, when I first moved here. I don't know, it's so funny, like I've always been writing stories and making people read them. And when I was little, writing them and making magazines, which I still have. And I was writing. I went to film school, actually, got my bachelor's in film. And then I thought I wanted to be in film, I didn't. And I was writing books. I didn't want to be sort of hindered by by the 120-page limit, you know, for a screenplay. I don't know if it's changed over the years, but that's what it was back then. And I started writing, and I just really appreciate what you said about capturing the light in somebody, because I feel like when I was starting out, into like writing in my 20s, and I was a bartender in New York City, and writing at night and just bartending so I could pay my bills to write. I was writing these stories, and I would think I was trying to capture the light of the humanity of people, and I don't think I could have articulated it back then, but sort of chasing this story of somebody's conflict and somebody's life and who they are, and exploring that. And then I got my first book deal in 2009 when the sort of craziness of Twilight was happening. So there was a lot of, I write for young people primarily, though I have gotten letters from some 80-year-old ladies in Minnesota who loved my first series. I was like, whoa. But yeah, so when the sort of craziness of Twilight happened, they were just buying a lot of YA books, and I had finished a book at the time, which I had not read Twilight. I had no idea what it was, and then, you know, then there was like Edward Cullen everywhere. But I sold it at that time, and that's sort of when I was like, oh, I'm a writer, like I'm gonna do this. But then came publishing deadlines and all of that, and so that's when I realized, okay, well, this isn't just me sitting in a cafe when I'm not bartending anymore. This is me being professionally accountable for what I'm writing, and that sort of changed how I looked at my art and attacked it and looked at it Did I answer your question?
You did, and I think that my question is, do you feel like the timing of writing a story that had kind of similar elements to something that became so popular like Twilight, do you think that helped kind of get your work out there and get publishers to notice what you were doing, regardless of maybe the fact that you didn't even know that was happening and said, okay, this is what I'm going to write? Do you feel like that was really the big step in getting you noticed?
I think what got me noticed was that I don't know if the publishing industry is the same anymore. I feel like, there was a lot of support from my publishing house at the time because I wrote, my first series was about a 500-year-old vampire who becomes human. And what interested me when I was writing it was that I was interested in why, when we feel dead inside, do we search for our humanity? Like, how do we come back to life? And then I started looking at all the books that were on the market, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't compete with this. This is like this huge thing that's out there. And I didn't think anybody would buy it. But it actually, because I think the genre was like sort of subverted, that it was supported. But at the time, like BEA and which is the Book Expo America, and ALA was very supportive at the time. But it's hard these days. I mean, it was really right before the sort of self-publishing things sort of exploded. So the publishing world is different, but I do think because that was going on, and I was sort of having a discussion about that in a different way, it was supported that way. But I since couldn't even imagine writing something like that now. I can't even fathom it.
Wow. Great. Well, we'll talk a little bit more, and wanted to talk with Christine as well. Talk to us a little bit about how you became a film producer and involved in the world of film. And I like how we have a person who thought they might be a writer, turned to be a photographer, someone who thought they were going to be a filmmaker, turned into a writer, and so we're kind of going along the sense now we've got our filmmaker.
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in film, I suppose, but I never, when I was younger, I didn't think it was even possible to work in films. The films I saw were like Sound of Music and, all these big, huge productions where you just can't even imagine anyone's making them. But then when I was in high school, I saw a film called Return of the Secaucus 7. Directed by John Sayles, and it was a film about people talking about their lives, and I was engrossed every second of the film. It was grittier. It felt like I was sitting in the living room with these people, and for the first time it dawned on me that I could maybe be part of that kind of storytelling. And so I fell in love with independent film. I studied English and then I decided that I would, and I studied film for my master's degree, but I was still, at that point, still afraid to, tell anyone I was interested in actually making films. And so my career path was really in, trying to get a graduate degree, teaching film history, studying film history. But a little while into several years of graduate school, I just thought, you know what, this isn't for me. Academics isn't for me. What I did, though, during that period of time is I started a film society. I was helping other people. I was working on films, but helping other people get their work out into the world. And so I kind of took a break from college and got a job working for the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in their film video department. And I started working with all these different filmmakers and was planning retrospectives with directors like Jane Campion and Julie Dash and planning these film festivals and working with the filmmakers. And they kept telling me, you should be a producer. We need someone who can champion independent film. And so I started exploring that. I applied to the Sundance Institute, where they provided a fellowship for producers, burgeoning producers, and I got it. And they gave me, mentorship support, financial support, and support for a film project. And so I made the film. Next year it premiered at Sundance. And after that I became a film producer. I've been producing films for 25 years. I started a film production finance company. We raised $40 million. I've raised about $70 million to $80 million for film production. I've made about 25 films. They've premiered all over the world at all the, Sundance and Cannes, been nominated for Academy Awards. And, but it's always been about independent films. And I just want to answer a question that was asked, which is, how did you get attention? And I think I chose to make films that weren't being made. And I made this film called American Splendor, and it did really well. It won tons of film festivals. It got tons of attention for me and lots of job offers. And I could have gone the Hollywood route, and I had those opportunities. But I had the sort of support from my husband to stay in the independent realm. And so I really decided, he and I together decided, let's make the kinds of films that you want to see and the kinds of films that people aren't making. So I made a film, films about artists, one called Howard, which is about Allen Ginsberg's poem, one called Factotum, which is about, Charles Bukowski. Different films that weren't being made. I've made 3 Native Indian films directed by Native Indian directors. And if I can say something to this panel and to this group who are looking about getting your work out there, what was successful for me is making work that wasn't being made. And that was different, 25 years ago. The world has changed. There's a lot more opportunity to make content. It's a lot cheaper. You can make a film on YouTube. But at the time I started making, those kinds of films were not made.
So do you think it was harder for people to kind of accept what you were doing, or do you feel like you were more filling a void, like making films about people like Allen Ginsberg, who are well known, but not, to the depth, and certainly not something you would see in Hollywood? Did you find that it was more of a challenge to get people to watch what you were doing, or that you were filling that void?
Definitely filling a void. I mean, all of the films, I sort of found a niche with some other, filmmakers, where we really got the content, we put it out there, and then it attracted larger name actors. So Matt Dillon was in Factotum. John Hamm and James Franco were in Howard. I did a film, very low budget film with Diane Keaton and Kevin Kline. So it was about so clearly that says to me, I made a film with Bradley Cooper that I wrote. It says to me that these actors were looking for vehicles or for content that they wanted to do. None of them made money. None of the actors, everybody was working for scale, but that we were filling a void.
Sure. And so I'll start with you for my next question is, what do you think your biggest professional challenge has been in terms of moving that work forward, of getting it noticed and heard?
Yeah, well, I want to say this correctly because I don't want to negate everything that was said in our panel before. But the biggest professional challenge is making films that people want to see, making films that work, right? So, I'm talking about making films that I love, or stories that aren't out there, we're filling a void, and stories that I want to see. But those stories have to be stories that other people want to see because it's so expensive to make film. You're not, you're not painting a painting on a canvas, and it's the cost of the canvas you have to bring. Even on small productions that are sort of professionally run, almost all my films have been with unions. They've been many low budget, $5 million and under, but I'm paying Teamsters union, so they cost money. So part of your job as a producer is to try to get the right story, try to get some actors attached who will bring some more funding into the project. Trying to manage your limited resources so you tell the story correctly, and then managing 100 people on a film set and all of this, and you're trying to get something on the screen that is worthwhile and is telling the story. And it's a story that people can watch and they're going to pay money to go see. And so that is a huge challenge for film producers. It's dealing with the realities of financing, funding, and then cutting through all that and getting everybody in the place, the actors, the director, everybody in that space where you can actually create a film that's that tells the story you want to tell and that people want to see it.
And was that knowledge something that you gained gradually, or was it something that you learned by experience? When did you know that you knew that you were doing it right?
Well, the first film I made, and even though it was a Native American film, I was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award right out of the gate. It was a big, huge deal. The fact is that I just felt proud that there was something on the screen. Every day I'd walk on, there'd be, oh my gosh, there's trucks and there are people and everyone's, they're filming the camera. I was so proud of that achievement. But then when we get to the editing suite, and you know what? All you can see is all we know, the only history we have of all those moments is right up on the screen. And I'm like, why is he wearing those pajamas? Why is that? I'm sort of looking at the screen and saying, oh my gosh, we missed this or we missed that. I let myself get totally consumed by the logistics. And I was so proud of that. And unfortunately, that hard work in many instances in that film did not pay off on the screen. And so I learned the lesson, it's what goes on the screen that's the most important. You can work really hard to get all that stuff done. But unless it goes on the screen, you have nothing. And I say that, you don't have nothing, but kind of when you're trying to put together a film, a story that everyone wanted to tell. And it's really it's a horrible experience. And so after that first film, I'm like, my people make fun of me because I have my own monitor. So when we're shooting, I'm watching everything that is shot, everything that goes through the camera, I see.
Important. So Rebecca, for you, what would you say has been your biggest professional challenge?
I appreciate what you're saying because I feel like it's, I'm going to take it a totally different way. I think I can be personal.
You can.
I think I can. I feel like this is a safe environment.
Safe space.
I just feel like like a year ago was, like for the writing for me has always been the thing I could rely on. Whether or not I ever published anything, it just was a thing I always knew I could rely on it, and once it was there on the page, I had it, I could do something with it, I could revise it, and it was there. But in 2017, 6 people died in my life. My father included, my best friend, the dog, and various other people. And for the first time professionally, I have an agent, and my agent works for me, but they don't wait for you forever. And I just couldn't produce. And there was just no way that I could possibly sit down, and it just wasn't there. It was the first time in my life that my writing had really let me down, my art had let me down, and I wasn't. So what I did instead is I read. I just read as much as I could. I watched a lot of movies and tried to find other people's art that was interesting. But I only started with my agent, and I have a book out now, but it took over a year for me to really sit down and say, oh, okay, I can embrace this again. And so that for me was the biggest challenge, when the thing that I could rely on artistically the most was gone. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I even a writer anymore? And yeah, I just needed to wait a while, Does that answer? I feel like I'm not. I feel like my middle school students, am I answering the question right?
No, I hear it. That's absolutely. No such thing as wrong answers in this forum, for sure. And I would think that's your biggest professional challenge, is having to deal with 10-year-olds all day long.
I was not exaggerating, I've gotten 11 emails since I haven't been at school today. Where are you? What are you doing?
Not here today. So Roland, For you, what would you say has been your biggest professional challenge?
Ongoing for like practically my whole career. I was, after I left the Peace Corps, which started my career, I went freelance. Freelance means that you really don't have a job. You have to get an assignment from someone, do it, send them a bill, and get paid. And then meanwhile, you got to pay your rent and buy all the other stuff and so forth. The only time I wasn't freelance was 4 or 5 years in Washington, D.C. I had a terrific job with a design group, made a ton of dough, but it was the unhappiest part of my life. I don't know what it was. I just really liked being freelance. And the magic of it is that when the wolves are closing in on you, the phone rings and it's somebody with a job. It's always been that way. Sort of lucky, but it's really fingernails on the edge of the cliff a lot of times when the phone doesn't ring and you're not getting a job. That's the scary part of being a freelance.
Would you send yourself out on assignments and hope you'd get photographs back you could sell to people, or you really were waiting for the magazines, the newspapers, and whomever it was to call you?
All the publications I used to work for, all the art directors, all my contacts, either the magazine doesn't exist anymore, like Life magazine, or all my art director friends have retired or died. So what I'm doing now is that these iconic pictures are in galleries. China and the West Coast and here, New York, and every once in a while they're buying images this big for real dough, and that's sort of.
So
we're talking about what to do going forward. You come up with a great idea, but whatever the great idea is, you have to keep doing it.
Yes.
50 years later, so it's historically great. Not that anyone thought about that then, but all of a sudden, the Beatles don't exist anymore. But I was lucky enough to see them when they did, and now these pictures are.
So, well, let me ask you this. When you decided that you wanted to go freelance, I think, many of us as artists have that dream of being able to, kind of make our own schedules or be that on-demand work. But you mentioned contacts and press contacts. So when you decided to go freelance, how did you get noticed by the people who would make your phone ring?
In my case, it was a total luck. I happened to be around when John Kennedy made that speech about asking not what your country can do for you, but
that little speech, Sure.
I joined the Peace Corps as their photographer. They went there and said, "Here I am. I'm Roland. I want to be your photographer." If anyone's seen my movie, not because I'm saying the same thing that's in the movie. Anyway, they said, "We don't need photographers. We need doctors and nurses and farmers and technicians." They said, "Well, let me hang out anyway." They said, "Okay, well, don't get your hopes up." So the next day I showed up, and all the press had gone. There was nothing to the Peace Corps, just an idea. It was Sergeant Schreiber and a couple of chairs, a table. And the press guy came screeching into the room where I was and said, "Where's that kid with the camera? Princess Beatrix is here from the Netherlands, and she wants to get her picture taken with Schreiber." So to make a long story short, I did a neat snap with a beautiful princess and a terrific looking sergeant. So I started doing odds and ends photography for the Peace Corps, and pretty soon I got hired to be their photographer to go around the world and photograph all the different Peace Corps installations. Coming back as a kid who really knew quite not very much about photography, but had this great portfolio of Peace Corps volunteers from around the world. It was easy to take my portfolio to Newsweek and Time, and wow, great stuff. And I started working as a freelance in DC for all the big mags, including National Geographic. And so I was sort of lucky. I mean, now, every day I'm told, With cell phones, 1 billion pictures every day are made. In my day, there were only like 15 guys who knew what an f-stop was, and I was lucky enough to be one of the 15. It was just a lucky thing.
And you mentioned a lot about luck, but you also mentioned that people said we don't need a photographer, we need doctors and nurses and et cetera. But you were tenacious. You said, okay, well, you might not think you need me, but you do. And so there's a little bit of luck, but there's also a little bit of persistence that I hear in your story.
I didn't know how to start. I was photographing out-of-work actors off Broadway at 25 bucks or something like that. I really wasn't a professional at all when I got this job with the Peace Corps. I just happened to be the one guy that showed up with the camera at the time that they needed a photographer. Even when they said they didn't need one, I said, no, you do need me, and I persevered, and I got the job, and I worked for them for more than 2 years.
How long did it take before you finally started defining yourself as a professional?
That's a great question. I guess during I knew the quality of my pictures that I was doing for the Peace Corps were being admired and oohed and ahed all over because they were pretty good pictures. A. B. Magazines couldn't afford to send their staffers to places like Togo or Sarawak to get pictures of American kids doing what they did, this sort of romantic trip abroad, but not as a tourist, but as a helper and an ambassador for democracy and the American way and things like that. All good things about the Peace Corps were. So I was getting a lot of terrific feedback from that. It was when I did go freelance. My very first gig as a freelance guy was for USIA to cover the March on Washington. I was the official photographer for the march. And I worked all day, up and down, back and forth. I was only about 25 or 26 at the time. But all those pictures ended up in the National Archives, and they're still using them. Part of the show was truncated, was part of that stuff. I can't say it any other way. I was just blessed with this amazing luck of being at the right place at the right time, stumbling into the Newport Folk Festival when Bob Dylan made his debut weekend thing, that kind of stuff.
But you also mentioned your...
Can I ask a couple of questions? How does a person who writes a novel about a 500-year-old vampire get to teach young children? It's a problem. You're next.
He's hijacking my panel. Pass her the microphone. I want to hear this answer too.
You want me to answer? Well, I don't know. It's so funny that that's the book series because I've written other things since then, but that's the thing that people talk to me about a lot. But I really wasn't interested in vampires at all. It's really not. I mean, that sounds crazy because but it's not really that important to the series. I mean, what is actually more important is about how when you feel metaphorically dead, how do you come back to the light? How do you embrace your humanity? How do you become that person once more? And that's really what the book was about. And so, I mean, it's funny because now when we say vampires, we see sparkling, and that's just ridiculous. But but at the time, I really had no idea about this whole genre, and I was just writing about it. And I had been teaching anyway throughout that whole time, and I had an opportunity to go and teach in a middle school, and I was like, I think I can do that. I have 2 master's degrees, I can do it. And so I go in and I'm like, these kids are crazy, I love them. They're nuts, because they're funny. You talk to it, if you're in a 6th grade classroom, there can be one kid who's like, well, actually, I think that the homework is quite easy, and blah, blah. And then you have another kid who's getting up and spinning around. So it's 6th grade is amazing. But it's also just reminds me, I feel in my books that I'm very, I feel the voice is very important in a younger voice book, and you have to really be able to tap into that, and they keep me there. But I like that. I don't know what that says about me.
I think that's great.
Can I ask another question?
You may ask another question. I'm curious to hear
what does a producer really do? When you go to a movie, there's an executive producer, associate producers, 15 other producers, produced by so-and-so. There's like 19 guys, and you're there watching a screen, and you didn't see those pajamas that finally ended up on the screen. Didn't you blame your director for that, or?
Oh, yeah.
Harsh, Roland.
That is a good question, but everyone asked that, and I think it's an important one. A producer does, essentially, if you have when you see a credit that says produced by, this is what that person does. And the reason why I'm saying that, and you see on the more recent films it says PGA after the name. Producers are trying to sort of like standardize so people know what it is that person did on the film. So if it says produced by the name and then PGA, this is what they did. They were involved in selecting the material, hiring the director. In many cases, the director brought me the piece of material, writer-director. They're involved in developing the material. In my instance, in most of the films that I've done, I'm very involved in the development process, and so I give tons of notes. And I say that up front with some of the directors with every one of the directors that I work with, that you're going to get a lot of notes from me, and you don't have to take them, you just have to give me an answer to that note. And the notes have to do with, I've read so many and I've written so many notes about some. I give great notes, but they have to do with, sometimes they're not just story notes, they're about production. They're about, if I'm trying to think about the resources, what I need to shoot this film and to make this film and to tell this story, when the script says, and there is an aerial shot of the town, then I'm thinking plain that. So you're developing, you're providing script notes, you are very involved in the casting process. And by the way, the PGA will call people, and I've had several films where they do this, and they interview the director, cast, everybody to see that you've done this, you've played this role. We're involved in casting, because casting means financing for many projects, but also creatively, of course. So I sit in casting sessions and you have to be involved in every piece of it. You're involved in hiring all the key positions, the production designer, the director of photography. You supervise the fundraising, the securing of the funds. Sometimes that's harder, and other times it's easier. You might, HBO was American Splendor, HBO paid for it. So it's that the job there was really managing the relationship between HBO and the production. We didn't have enough money to make the film, so a lot of the job was trying to going back to HBO and justifying why we needed more money. So you're very involved in the financial part of it. And then you're there. Some producers aren't actually there during production on much bigger films. On mine, they're smaller films. I was there. I'm there on set every day watching exactly what's happening, And so you have to be there to make snap decisions about, oh my gosh, we went overtime yesterday, so we can't afford, the crane on Friday. And so you have to make snap decisions that seriously impact the end result. So you're supervising production, and some people have people who do that for you. It just depends on who your keys are and what their experience is. And then a lot of the job is making sure that the film gets the proper marketing and distribution, and that you have the right plan. Most of my films, and that's kind of a segue to my current position, most of my films relied on premiering at a film festival and the film being sold at that film festival. So we're trying to position the film. You come up with, usually before you even start the film, you come up with a pretty detailed marketing and distribution plan. You're calling the film festivals, you're letting all of those people know when the film's going to be done, you're setting up screenings, and then you're involved in selling. And then, I have a film that I made 13 years ago, and I still am signing the tax forms for those films. And so, essentially, a produced by film is one where you're working on each stage of the production from script to screen. And screen means getting it out into the world. There are other producers. There's an executive producer. Executive producer means you're either you're involved in all the financing, or you, on much bigger productions, you are overseeing the day-to-day production of a film. So on smaller films, that role is called the line producer. That's a piece of it. They're usually not involved in setting up, the developing the project. They're usually involved in either financing or just day-to-day production, and then they lead the production once it's in the can. Associate producers can be people who, my assistant, for instance, can be someone who acts on my behalf, maybe goes on location scouts, and they do, some associate producers do as much as the producer does because they're involved every step of the way. Co-producers, sort of somewhere in between. But the real, when you see produced by PGA, you know exactly what they do. The co-producer and associate producers are a little bit, it's not necessarily one thing. Some co-producers, they're just involved in post-production. That's for feature films. Television, those titles mean something very different. When you're an executive producer of a television show, you are essentially the creative force behind the project. When you're a producer, you're usually responsible for the sort of day-to-day management of the production. So it gets a little confusing when you go between formats.
Yeah, and so it's almost like the producers are driving the bus. It's like for my very small community access television program, it's like I consider myself the producer, but I'm also the host, the writer, the assignment editor, the field producer, all of those things in one. But certainly
the best producers are people who know all of the jobs, but who don't do any one of them full time, because then you're not a producer. And I say this to directors, best directors are directors who know how to produce, but know when to stop producing.
And is it a professional challenge for you, to work with so many creative people and kind of to be that lead person in charge of the vision, in charge of the look, working with your directors and your director of photography, et cetera? What's the challenge of making sure that everybody is on the same page? And what's the danger of, how can that block moving the work forward if everybody isn't?
Well, it is. You have to, that's my favorite part and the worst part. You're dealing with creative types and money types, and you're trying to sort of appease everybody. You're trying to get them to all work together. I happen to like crazy people. And most people who, most great artists are crazy, and I'm not saying you have to be crazy, but, I like being around sort of crazy people. And, I should be in the circus, because that's what the kind of films that I make is. It's a circus. And so you have all these different types of people, but I love that. But it's the hardest thing to manage, and sometimes it doesn't always work. And unfortunately for me, like I've made so many films that I could be on, development and pre-production is my favorite part because everyone loves each other and we're going to make a movie, and then you get into production. 2 days in, there's always somebody who has to go. And the sad part about production is you're spending so much money every single day. You have all these people, they have to all get along. You know, it's an unnatural set of circumstances. And sometimes the chemistry doesn't work and you just have to move someone out. But I've had people where I hired them on one film, they had to leave 2 days, we just had to let them go. And then I hired them on another production. Because it's just like a pressure cooker, but I love that. It's like, you know, an adrenaline high.
Yeah, it definitely gets the creative juices flowing in that kind of frenetic environment. So getting back to our kind of moving work forward topic, I think what I've heard from all of you, really, it's a mix of luck, being in the right place at the right time, but also recognizing the opportunities that you can take that will help move that forward. So Rebecca, I want to start with you in that, in terms of kind of looking at, if you can think of, you know, obviously you had a desire to be published, the desire to be a writer, but can you talk a little bit about the opportunities that laid out in front of you that you were able to recognize to say, I want to take this?
I would say it was like just the dogged pursuit of getting my work out there and believing that somebody would eventually say yes. And I think that, like, if you don't try, you don't get. You know, you're never gonna know if you don't put your work out there. And I think, like, the thing that I find to be the most powerful things that I've heard you guys say is that recognizing that, like, if you don't keep trying and don't keep looking at all these different avenues, go to workshops. I mean, for me personally, it was like educating myself in every way possible. And if, like, somebody was like, no, I was like, okay, and move on, you know, like try to find, you know, somebody who was going to believe in what I was writing. But, you know, I was very lucky in that the first book that I wrote was published, but I worked really hard on getting that book to where it needed to be. I took a lot of workshops. I wrote and listened to people's feedback and took that feedback when it was given to me. And I think, like, the biggest thing is saying, yeah, I think some of it is luck. Yeah, it's pretty good, darn lucky that I happened to write a book with a vampire in it. Ironically, not realizing there was this explosion of stuff going on, because why would I have read a YA novel? I didn't even know that what I had written was a book for young people at the time until I really educated myself about it. I had pursued just the art of storytelling, which I think we're all talking about, that, you know, you have no piece of art if you're not really trying to explore some sort of question about humanity and why we're all here and what we're trying to, you know, capture in our art. So anyway, just I think my opportunities were when somebody said yes. If I thought it reflected what I'm trying to do, I took it, and I didn't care what it was, really.
What
as
about,
long as it was good for my work.
What about when people said no?
I just said, okay, and then I just kept going. Because, like, rejection stories are fun. And putting all of your rejection letters, if anybody's a writer, is anybody in here a writer? Anybody here? Yeah! Man, I'm all alone. If you're, but I think too, like, I mean, there's rejection letters and everything, and I think that, I mean, putting them in a binder was really fun, because I was like, look, you know? And even now, on a professional level, I'm still rejected in some ways, you know? Like, there's all different types of rejection. Like, I was published in 11 territories around the world with my first book, but then my publisher here in the United States didn't want to publish it because it didn't make a certain amount of money. But everywhere in the world did. So, and that bought it did. So, I mean, there's different levels of, like, success, and we're pushing through that.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that can keep people from themselves from moving that work forward, is kind of hearing those rejections and saying, I'm not good enough. So do you have any advice, or how do you push through those rejections? I mean, I like keeping the book of it, right? It's almost humorous. But, you know.
It's like, we don't know why you would write this story. It's like, okay. Like, no,
wow.
No, like, there actually, some of them are really funny. Some of them, like, you could tell they didn't even, like, read what you sent them. But I would say just, believe it. I think, like, and this sounds kind of cheesy, I think, but I think I'm just going to say it anyway, because whatever. But, like, you have to believe that the art is enough. that what you're doing is enough, and that if somebody's not going to appreciate it, you have to do it for you. And if you're not doing it for yourself, I think initially to start out, then I think, why are you doing it? And you have to believe that eventually you're going to get to the part in your career, or you're going to find somebody who's going to see it the way that you see it, or I mean, there is nothing I find more satisfying than when a young reader comes up to me at a meet and greet and is like, your book meant so much to me. And I'm like, yes, okay, I did it. And it's not just like ego for me, it's like, I put this out there, I wanted somebody to read it, and it meant something to them, and that's what's important. P.S. American Splendor is the bomb. That's one of my favorite movies ever. I watched it in film school. But that's what I mean. Like this sort of like, it's not just verbal validation, but it's also like knowing that somebody out there is reading your work or looking at your work or looking at one of your photographs and feeling something and connecting and seeing something of themselves or this human experience in that piece of art. That for me is like, you have to believe that the work is enough.
Absolutely. Roland, for you, going back to that kind of moment where, and I forgot the original trajectory of my question, but really recognizing...
I got a great answer to that non-question.
Recognizing the opportunities that were laid out before you.
Rebecca's story makes me want to write again. I mean,
that's
a lot
fantastic.
A lot of people say, Brian, Roland, why don't you write that story about all the stuff you've done?
You should. You should.
See? and the reason I haven't so far is that I simply don't have the discipline to, sit down every day at a certain hour, between a couple hours, and write every day. It's like for people who do yoga every day, do it every day religiously. They don't need yoga because they do it every day.
Because they've already got yoga.
The same way with me and writing. It's awfully hard, too. Yes. I love to write. When I finish writing something, it's good. I write good.
You should. Or write well.
No, I hope you got the joke. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, well...
Recognizing opportunities.
In my field, let's say, in rejection notices. When you leave your portfolio and you come back and they say, your work is very interesting, it's time to turn on your heels and leave the room. If they say it's interesting, leave. It's really interesting, that's all we can say about it. Thanks a lot. Goodbye. For photographers, if they're starting out, if anybody just want to be a photographer and starting out, I mean, it's a dangerous gig now because everyone is a photographer. Well, my advice, in a nutshell, don't try to do everything. Pick a subject, pick one thing and get really good at one thing. And then you'll be known as that really good one thing photographer. Then after you get your feet wet and start publishing and doing more, you can branch out and do 2 or 3 things. And they'll remember you for the one thing, but at least you'll branch out intellectually on your own to go further as a complete artist. I've done a lot of stuff because I've been shooting for 55, 60 years, and a lot of stuff has become iconic simply because the subject matter is pretty interesting.
Do you still take pictures?
Huh?
Do you still shoot?
Oh yeah, I shoot all the time, but I'm photographing mostly, instead of portraits, I'm photographing shadows and textures and things. And when you blow them up and screw around with them on your Photoshop computer stuff, you can make these sort of real art, abstract art.
Get a little more creative.
Like expressionist painting, which so make me want to paint again. So I got to write the book, paint the pictures, keep shooting, and walk the dog.
Exactly. Would love to, if anyone out there in the audience has questions, would love to take some questions from the audience for our panelists. Anybody?
We're very thorough, but...
Chris.
So I'm just curious with technology. I grew up in like the 80s and 90s, and I remember going to college and I was editing on the Beta back and forth, and then really old school. I can edit with this, I can take photos with this. I follow, Twitter, people tell stories. Like Norm MacDonald, I follow him. He just told a story. There was maybe 15, 20 weeks. He told a story. He talked about the advantages and disadvantages of technology in terms of photography, writing, filmmaking.
Sure. So I think Chris is asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, the advantages and disadvantages of having technology at your fingertips from an artistic standpoint.
Two most important words in photography. The words you have to remember whether you're thinking about taking a camera with you that day or not. Two most important words. Flying saucer. You don't have your camera with you and it flies over and oh, damn, there goes the greatest picture I could have taken. Holy moly. Yeah. Having that, the phone cameras used to be a joke, but the latest ones are remarkably good. They'll take a picture anywhere, anytime. They got qualities that you can't teach if they're so good. I'm sort of glad that I started when cameras had dials and numbers and people would rather pay me to do it than learn how to do it themselves. I was really lucky. Technology.
Okay, you can pass too.
I think it's interesting, I was just uploading to Instagram, on my story. The concept of story now is visual and how it and how we talk about story and even talking to my students about story and the visual sort of literacy that they have and how fast they are. But I would say some of the things that I love about technology is that I can collaborate much more easily with people via technology, whereas I still really benefit from handwriting everything and then printing it and then writing over it and handwriting. That's part of my process, but I do enjoy the easy collaboration. But it's just fascinating to me to think about story and how we create story. But one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of yours is how you frame things and how what is inside the frame creates a story. And I just so appreciate your work for that reason as well as yours. And I love that. And I don't know if we really think about story in still images that exist on their own as frequently as we did. Because now I feel it's the what's next generation, right? It's what's next, we see this image, then what's next in 30 seconds on Instagram, then what's next after that. And that somehow creates story. But I love the idea of thinking about story in frames or in books and sort of compact and that's one story. But that idea of story is different now, where it's constantly changing, constantly moving. I think that's how technology is interesting to me.
Well, we were talking about the concept of framing at lunch. And
I'm fascinated by this.
I became fascinated because you were talking about it. Really, we look at this picture of John Lennon, and it's not just a picture of John Lennon. There are three other people who are looking at him or looking at other people, and they tell the story as well, and they're included in that frame. Exactly. And so it's what we see in this frame, but then you were also talking about what you don't see.
Right, and there's this great Salman Rushdie quote, which is the only way to see the whole picture is to step outside your frame. And that today, it's so easy not to step outside your frame. It's so easy not to, and technology allows us, I think, to stay also insular, but also allows us to step outside our frames and see other people's experiences that are going on all around the world. And I'm so fascinated by this idea of framing and, who we leave out of a frame in a picture and who we put in it. And even when I'm writing, whose perspective am I not telling when I'm in a first-person perspective? Who am I not thinking about? Often I'll write in another character's perspective who's not even the focus of the scene, so I can try to see it from other perspectives. And so I love technology for that reason, but I'm obsessed with the idea of framing right now.
That's great. So Christine, for you, the question of technology.
Yeah. Film is dependent on technology, or making a film, right? And and innovation. Every great film, behind every great film, there's great innovation. You look at it, new cameras are developed because some director team wanted to show something that wasn't possible with the current technology. So technology for our field is great. It's also great for access. So over the years, a certain film that I made was a lot more expensive, and I could make it less expensively today because of changes in technology. And it provides access to more storytellers. You don't have to have tons and tons of money to make a film anymore. You can make it on your iPhone. The problem is, in my mind, is that there's now a glut of film. There's so much content out there. It's out there in the world. And again, I live in Provincetown, among other places, and I love Provincetown because everybody is entitled to pursue their artistic life, but not everybody is a film artist. And so the problem now is how do people see great work? And we see it, and that's a segue into my position at the Provincetown Film Society. Part of the challenge that I was seeing is that we're making these films that we believe are art and great films, and they're just not getting to they're not sort of like getting to the audiences because there's so much content out there. Go on Netflix. You can't find my film on Netflix unless you dig deep into the archives of Netflix and somehow know the exact name and director and whatever. It's on there, but you can't find it because you have all this other stuff. So at the Film Society, or and festivals, these are curated programs, and they're programs. And that is important. I think it's important that we think about having a discerning eye. That's important to me. I built my career on that. I built my career on the belief that there is a discerning audience. And so I mean, and it troubles me that that there are some films. There's a film I made called The Turin Horse, 2.5 hours, black and white. Won the Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival. Bela Tar, he's a brilliant filmmaker. But you must see it on a big screen to fully appreciate that film. And it saddens me to think that someone's watching it on me, if they get there, that they're watching it on a small iPhone. It just breaks my heart. And we have a year-round cinema, and it's really expensive to keep going year-round. But there's something about being able to be part of a movement to keep these art house cinemas going for the kind of content and the kind of experience that we as filmmakers who have worked, blood, sweat, and tears, worked so hard to make that work, an experience that we envisioned for the audience.
Wonderful. A question back here.
Just to build on that, I was curious as to the impact that technology has had on the back end of distribution, whether it's complicated things, simplified things, both.
Well, we can also, almost anyone who makes a film can get it on Amazon, even Netflix, iTunes, which is great. You can say, I made a film, you can find it on iTunes, and that's good. But the problem is they pay nothing. Or very little. And so it still costs money to pay people to drive trucks, to pick up the camera. Someone's got it, hopefully there's no robots doing that, but you still have to pay people to make that film, even if the technology makes it so that the lights are a lot cheaper. I mean, oh my gosh, when they made lights that were not these big, huge 5Ks that took 4 people to move them, I was so happy because it brought down lighting costs significantly. I love that. But it's like you still have to pay somebody to move equipment and somebody to drive, and actors, and that costs money, and so that's, you know, that's still an issue. And so great that there are a lot more platforms to see the work, but that means filmmakers are making a lot less money. And that's why everyone's gravitating towards television, and that's why you know, now people want to, you know, make their money up front, or they're going towards Netflix. Flip side of that is Netflix now is saying, okay, our goal is to create all the content. We're not just going to sort of license content that was created by other people. Our goal is now we're going to create all the content, which is, oh my gosh, everyone's so happy because they're making all this content. But again, you know, they can pick and choose if they want to highlight your content. And all of it translates to filmmakers, people, they're all making less money. And that is unfortunate.
Other questions? Bert.
So, first of all, just a comment on the technology end. I can imagine a very similar conversation happening in 1970, saying, how do people how do they make films or take photos 30 years ago without the technology we have? I think it's an ongoing process. But I really resonated with something that Christine said early on. You said two things. You said, first, I try and make films that aren't there. And then secondly, I try and make things that people want to see. Which is like a double-edged, it sounds like a double-edged sword. It's like, I'm looking for something that's not there, but when it's there, people will like it if they want it. So, would any of you like to talk about your vision for doing that?
Well, I just want to jump in on that. There are a lot of stories that women can want to tell, that people want to see, but it's not there. That I'm Pacific Islander. What Pacific Island film have you seen recently that tells my story? I haven't seen it. So I think those are films that aren't being told, but that people want to see. It's those films.
I'll speak to that to say that anytime I ever wrote for an idea, my work wasn't published. But everything I've ever wrote for myself, like the book that came out 2 years ago, was actually set here on the Cape. Was a love letter I wrote to myself at 15, and that's what I needed to write. And I feel like that's what I put out there, what I would have wanted at 15 years old for myself at that time.
It's right about you see a terrific movie, and then you realize that Clark Gable and Myrna Loy did the same movie like 45 years ago. Or there's a big hit movie like Back to the Future, then there's Back to the Future 2, Back to the Future 3. So I understand where those are pictures like, they're not original anymore, it's just sort of like, what's the word? Comfort food or something like that, visual comfort food. But I thought, when an original film does come out that hasn't been made before, such as Jacob's Ladder, that's the kind of movie that is an eye-opener. And so we have to be open for not only what hasn't been, certainly what hasn't been done before, but films that are fresh, but you still want to see them. I'm getting. Of course you can.
There's also like the diverse voices movement within YA literature, which was spearheaded by Walter Dean Myers, who has since passed. But like, especially in the children's literature market, there is a lot of activism for authentic storytelling, and from the voices of the people who have lived those experiences. And so, like, for example, there's a book that came out last year called Flying Lessons, which is a collection of short stories, all written by various authors of various ethnicities and cultures, written by those people with characters of, starring those cultures and those ethnicities. So I think that's a place where I'm really proud to be a YA writer.
So for all the artists in the room, I know we're getting close to the end, what would be your advice, and Roland, I think we can start with you, to people who are at the point where they want to move their work forward? What would you say to encourage them to take those opportunities or keep their eyes open for the things that could help them? What do they have to do to be tenacious and move forward with their work?
That's the kind of question I was really afraid somebody was going to ask me.
That's my job.
You get a great idea, well, everybody gets great ideas all the time. All of a sudden you come up with this is a terrific idea, and you really mean it. This time it's a terrific idea, but you still got to do it. And we've heard from Christine about all the people involved. When you have to do something, it takes an army of people to do that. The other thing is, that part already said, creating stuff is fun. Marketing it and distributing it, unless you're a marketer and distributor, is no fun. So there's that flip side to it. I guess what the answer is, if you come up with the idea that's so great and you really believe it and you can make it your life's work, then you're going to find a way to do that, and gathering the people that you need to gather and get it done. But just the idea itself, they come all the time.
So it takes work, is what Roland is saying, for sure. It takes some work. It takes some work.
I'd say so, I would echo and agree with you. It does take work, and I'd say surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, and finding an artist community or people of peers that are going to help you and not try to hinder you, especially if you're just starting out. My writers group are my BFFs, but they give me the hard feedback. So finding people who are going to be supportive for you when you do get that great idea, and other people that are going to, in your close circle, that's going to say to you, I really don't know if you need this elephant in your story or whatever. But people who are going to support you, help you, challenge you, criticize you, but in a way that's generative. That's, I find, is really, I wish I had known that 15 years ago.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she took my answer. Especially in film, in our media that is intended for an audience of more people than one. My greatest advice would be find people who you trust, who will disagree with you. You might not ultimately, choose their solution, but you need people to say, that doesn't look good. There's a problem there. And I found, there's a couple of big budget films that I worked with big stars and directors who were big names. And I was always astounded that nobody would say, that's bad, that doesn't look good, or you're making a mistake, because everybody was invested in making that person happy. And that person wanted people to disagree with him, but he just, everyone was afraid, including myself. So I'm not saying it's easy, but find people who you trust and who can also pick you up when you're rejected day in and day out and you're really depressed. And I'm going to end this by saying my sister's here, and she has attended and supported everything that I've done, and having someone like that in your life makes it worthwhile, and it's the only way that I've been able to get through my career. That person.
Yay. Well, Christine Walker, Rebecca Maisel-Sullivan, and Roland Sherman, thank you so much for being part of our panel, and thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. Big round of applause for our panelists.